This is Johnny Detroit March Madness. We're going to look at some early line movement for both Thursday and Friday's game. One of the things historically has held true, especially if you check out pregameforums.com, go under CBB for college basketball and read RJ Bell's breakdown of the tournament, is if you're going to get your upsets, they're going to happen early. By the end of the dance, the whole Cinderella thing, for the most part, goes outside of the window, and it's usually one of the best teams that is competing in the Final Four, and the best team that usually wins the first round, sometimes the second, are great for the Cinderella stories, but they turn back into a pumpkin, and it's usually the Dukes, the Carolinas, the whatnots playing for the championship. But early on, there is some value, whether it's psychological that the good teams are going in thinking about the championship. Um, these no-name teams or these bubble-type teams are just excited to be in the dance, and they're giving their all. For whatever the reason, historically, if you're going to hit some upsets, it's going to be early on. Towards later in the tournament, you're going to have the better teams as the cream rises to the top. So let's look at Thursday first. I'm pulling out from sportsoptions.com, who is a partner of pregame. They power us with our lines feeds, and they monitor basically every book: Vegas books, offshore books, credit books. So let's take a look right now. We're looking at Thursday's games. Um, Princeton, Kentucky. Right now, the public's about 50-50 according to the public feed that I actually created, which will be implemented in the new Sportsbook Spy version, where some of the square books are weighted a little heavier, so the numbers aren't as skewed, and you're getting more of a public feel. But one thing to note is when you're looking at the public data, especially this early, how many of you watching this, raise your hands, have already placed your bets for Thursday and Friday? A lot of that data, most of your public bettors are not going to be betting until game day. So be really careful with putting too much emphasis on these early betting trend numbers. So Princeton, Kentucky, the line basically opened at 14 and a half. I'm using bookmaker slash Chris for this. Right now it's sitting at 13 and a half, 14, so not movement really there. We move over to Santa Barbara, Florida, where the early action, like I said earlier, don't put too much emphasis on that. Open at 14 and a half. It's already down to 13. Some smaller offshores that cater to the sharper bettors, they're ready at 12 and a half. Michigan and UCLA, Michigan State went from 1 to 2. Moving on, we are at Bucknell, Connecticut, which is interesting. Connecticut obviously hit the 5 games in a row, Big East record. Their stud Kembe, 5 straight games, is putting up tons of points. He also set a Big East record. So you'd think that coming into the tournament they'd be red hot, but I went against them with Louisville, thinking that they were going to come back to reality. I was wrong, but it looks like the sharp bettors are using my theory from the Big East title game into their first game of the tournament, because this line opened at 13. Right now you're sitting at 10 and a half. So the brackets were announced at 6. Lines were put up shortly thereafter. By this morning, this line has already dropped close to 3 full points, and Mr. Joe Public is not moving anything 3 full points within a 24-hour time span. Moving on, we have Missouri. They opened at 3. They're down to -1 already. Old Dominion and Butler, that game went from 1 to 2. What's one thing to notice, if you notice, the games that are moving in favor of the favorites, you guys should say, by a point or so, are the games like the Old Dominions, the Butlers, the Michigan State teams, where when you're looking at some of the bigger seeded teams, those lines are the ones that are dropping, where the anticipation is the sharp bettors feel those lines are inflated towards the favorite, and they're getting tons of value, and they're hammering those things early, especially in the Connecticut game, which they feel the public's going to be all over. They've already taken 3 points of value away from that game. Moving on, we'll have Richmond and Vanderbilt. That game went from -2 to -1. Louisville and Morehead State, here's one that flips the other side. The line opened at 8 and is currently at 9.5. So there's one for the favorites. Wolford BYU, line opened at 8.5. It's down to 8. Bet Chris is down to 7.5. Gonzaga St. John's 1.5 to 2. Northern Colorado, San Diego State, that line opened at 17. That's down to 15.5 already. Temple, Penn State. Temple opened at a pick 'em. It's ready up to 2.5. It's really, once again, you got a game that's a lesser seed that, I guess you could say kind of got lucky. They beat a Michigan State team. They played Ohio State. Played competitively, I guess you could say. They should have covered technically, but that one when in benefit of the favorite. Utah, Kansas State, that's still sitting at the 1.5 opener. Here's another one. Belmont, Wisconsin. Wisconsin opened at 6. They're down to 4.5 already. And we're moving on to Friday. North Carolina opened at 20. Once again, down to 18. Georgia, Washington. Washington's at 5. Now it's at 5.5. Duke, 22.5. Still basically 22.5, 23. Michigan, Tennessee. Michigan opened 1. Now we're sitting Tennessee -1. George Mason opened 1, now at 1.5. Syracuse opened 10.5. That's went up a point, so I guess you could say a small lean towards the favorite to 11.5. Xavier, Marquette, that's still sitting at the 1.5. Moving on, we have Akron. That's still sitting in where it was with Notre Dame, open at 13, still sitting at 12.5, 13. We have the Florida State game, basically the same. Purdue game, 15.5 down to 14. Arizona opened 6.5. They're down to 5, 5.5. Texas opened at 11. They're down to 9.5. Kansas game still at the 22.5. UNLV opened at a pick. Now they're -1.5. So I guess what I'm getting at is if you pick the best teams and the ones that you really feel have the best shots, almost every single one of them for the games that I broke down, the lines have dropped anywhere from 1 and as high as 3 on the Connecticut. So there's a couple things to take into account with this. One, if you are looking to take the dogs, you have to factor in you are losing a lot of the value off that initial line. The second thing is it shows that historically in the tournament that some of these lesser teams do play their balls out in opening the rounds. But at the same time, as you're going to see as we get deeper in the tournament, we'll do some more of these videos, you'll see that those favorite lines don't fluctuate as much because reality starts to kick in when these guys, these stud athletes, these former McDonald's All-Americans realize they're a couple games away from the big dance or a game away from the big dance to win it all. That's when you're going to start seeing these teams play the way they can play. So opening round, they're traveling, they're all excited, they're the number 1 seeds, the second seeds, 1 down, they're playing who gives a shit state, favored by 20. It's really hard for them to get up for the game. You know, they're celebrating, get ready for the next round when they're up that 25 in the second half. Then they start screwing around, not taking the game as seriously. You get a couple garbage points, that team's playing for pride, who came from some state that no one's ever heard of, and all of a sudden you get a backdoor cover. So once again, this is the breakdown line movers for round 1. We're going to come back once the first round's completed. We're going to break down round 2, and we're going to look and see, and I can almost guarantee that you're going to see a transgression of the lines of where they're going to move from the favorites, people, the early sharp action being on those dogs, to where it's going to be a little more balanced and the lines are going to be a little more solid. So from Johnny Detroit, pregame.com, this is March Madness 2011 line mover segment, round 1. We'll be back for round 2. And from me to you, best of luck in your brackets. And I'm taking Duke to win it all. Tip, tip. So thank you for watching, and we'll be back with round 2.